Okay na? Okay, hello, good evening everyone. What's up, madlang people? That's energy. Yes, good evening IFNG and to our members all over the world. And I would like to say hi first to my co-admins, Gladys and Marvin. Are you here, Marvin and Gladys? Please say hi.
Good evening, Philippines,
Hello,
and
hello.
good afternoon, Middle East.
So I hope everyone is okay, especially I just heard or I just saw on Facebook na may lindol sa Philippines, no? So prayers lalo na sa mga nasa Mindorong members. Okay, so yes, we have an exciting episode for today. Our topic is brought to you by British Council Philippines, and it's all about writing and speaking. So if you're struggling with writing and speaking, this is the perfect time for you. So if you have friends or your colleagues, you can share this live, and as well as you can invite them, and you can rewatch this if you are on duty right now. So without further ado, let's welcome British Council Philippines for their session for tonight. Hello, Miss Danica.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks again for inviting us in your webinars, yung series of webinars of IFMG team. And as Sir Jeff has mentioned earlier, we will be delivering or we will be conducting a series of webinars in the next 3 weeks. And we will start off tonight with the Ielts writing. So in the next week, it's another Ielts writing for task 2. And the week after that will be Ielts speaking. So tonight, we are joined by one of our resident Ielts experts at the British Council. And she is currently teaching at the Ateneo Graduate School. And she has a doctorate degree in literacy and Master of Arts degree in literature. So without further ado, let me welcome Miss Marge Fajardo. Hi, Miss Marge.
Hello. Thank you very much for inviting me. So first of all, thank you, British Council, for inviting me, and of course the IFNG group. Okay, so thank you for your trust in the British Council. So for guiding you through this series of webinars, and yes, today we shall talk about writing, and that is we're going to focus on the first task for the academic writing test. All right. So first of all, yes, Miss Danica told me that all of you here comes from different parts of the world. You're all nurses working, so in different parts of the world. So can you please type in the chat box? So I just want to have a feel of the participants for this group. Can you type in the chat box where are you working right now? Okay, so we have from Doha, Singapore, Abu Dhabi, okay, Zamboanga, okay, so Kuwait, all right. So mostly from the Middle East, and of course we have from the Philippines, Oman, all right. So, okay, good. So indeed, it's my pleasure to actually help you ace the writing test. Oh, all the way from Saudi Arabia, yes. So thank you. So once in a while, we are going to use this chat box. So for you to type in your answer so that in a way, it's not just be talking, but we hope that this is going to be an interactive format. All right. All right. Okay, now, if you have questions, because we will actually give time for questions and answers later. So again, please use the chat box so to type in your questions, okay? All right, so let me now share my screen and let's get the ball rolling. All right. So our objective for today's webinar is to actually highlight, okay, so and practice exam techniques so that you could do well in the first writing task. Okay, so because you're all nurses, so I would assume that you would take the academic, okay, so strand of the IELTS writing task. All right, so do you know that I browsed through the IELTS.org website, and do you know that in 2019, Filipino IELTS test takers actually scored an average of 6.1 in the writing task or the academic track. Okay, I don't think that's bad. 6.1 is good enough because you know what? We actually have the same average rating alongside Canada, Greece, and Malaysia. Okay, so apparently, of all the non-English speaking countries in the world, we're in a way quite doing well when it comes to writing. Okay, so I think that's a good sign. Okay, so however, since you are actually going to take the academic track, I think we are aiming for a particular band score, right? Okay, so don't worry because this particular webinar hopefully will get through, help you get through that process. Okay, so of improving so your scores in the IELTS. All right, so again, as most of you already know, the IELTS is proudly co-owned by the British Council, the IDP, and the Cambridge Assessment English. So if you want to take IELTS, so you can either go to any of these organizations, okay? So because they will help you with your exams, okay? All right, so the IELTS is designed to assess the English language ability of people who intend to study, work, or live where English is the language of communication. And some of you are already actually working there, okay, so in your target country. So, but of course, when you actually take the IELTS, then somehow you'll get that certificate, okay, so which will somehow measure so your proficiency in the macro skills of English, which is writing, reading, listening, and speaking. So of all the four, okay, so macro language skills, I think most Filipinos find it more difficult. So when it comes to write, especially the first task, okay, so of the writing task, so which is describing a graph. So, and that's what we're going to find out right now. So how do we actually do well so on this part of the test? Now, I'd like to remind you the band's scale for the IELTS, okay? So if you get a 9, then that means you're an expert user, okay? So if you get an 8, a very good user, 7, good user, 6, competent, 5, modest. We don't want, okay? So any of those 4, 3, 2, and 1 band scores. But I just wanted to find out, okay? So can you go to the chat box again and type in what score, okay? So what overall band score are you aiming for? All right. Okay, so some of you said 6.5 is at a minimum. Okay, an 8, that's good, Riza. Okay, go for it, girl. A 7, okay. 7. I think for academic task, okay, so I think we should get a minimum of 7. So at least an overall band score, okay, so rather of 7, okay, and that means if you do well in the writing task, then it could actually pull up, okay, so your overall band score. All right, now I have a question for you. Without yet, okay, so listening to the tips on writing on the writing task, based only on your existing skills in writing, what particular band score do you think are you likely to get in the writing task? Can you type in the chat box? So, all right. So some of you says presently you think you're a 6, okay, somewhere in that level, or a 7, okay, or a 6. All right. I think that's good. Okay, so a 6 is good enough for me. Look at this. A 6 means you're a competent user, and competent means you can convey your messages. Okay, so to your audience, quite good enough. Okay, so but if you want to really aim for a 7, because a 7 will pull up your overall band score, then you listen to the tips which I'm going to share to you. Okay, all right. So here, so an over band score is as well as your individual band score, so will be given. Okay, so your test result will be valid for 2 years. So if you take it this year, so 2021, then it's going to be valid until 2023. Okay, well, there are really no passing or failing mark. Okay, so it's just that the IELTS examiner.
Excuse me, Miss Marge, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think we
Yes.
cannot hear you.
Oh, sorry. Why is that?
We can
Alright.
hear you, ma'am. Clearly.
Oo nga. I wonder why is that, because I'm also not muted. Okay. What? Okay da? Can you hear me? Okay, sige. All right. So, how many task 1 types are there? Okay, so because in task 1, okay, so of the academic task, you are going to be given different data in visual forms. Okay, so can you type again in the chat box, how many do you think are the types of visual data that is likely to be used in the IELTS test? So can you type in the chat box? Okay, so Rises says 1, 2, or 3. Okay. Actually, there are many, okay, 3 or 4. So the question mark there tells me, of course, you're not sure, or 2. Yes. Actually, according to IELTS, okay, because they are the ones who are making the tests. There's the line graph, there's the bar chart, you could be given tables, a pie chart, or a diagram, map, or process. So actually, there are 5 different types of charts, okay, or visual data that could be given to you. Okay, so any of this, or sometimes a combination of this, so could actually be given to you for analysis. All right, so let's have this as an example. Okay, so can you look at this? This is an example of a line graph. Okay, so the line graph says here, okay, so the chart below so shows the changes that took place in 3 different areas of crime in Newport City Center from 2003 to 2012. Okay, so what you're supposed to do is to summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Okay, so if you're going to look at this, okay, so once you are given this graph, don't panic. Okay, so remember, a line graph has these parts. It has the x-axis, okay, so the horizontal line is the x-axis, okay, so and the y-axis, okay, is the vertical line. So look at that carefully when you're given a line graph. Okay, see what it's telling you. So here, if you look at the x-axis, you're given the year, okay, from 2003 to 2012, and then the y-axis will tell you the number of incidents. Incidents about what? Burglary, car theft, and robbery, okay? So this means that when you are given this graph, the first thing that you have to do, okay, and that is what you're going to put as the introductory sentence of your composition. So you have to tell us, what is the graph about? Okay, now some of you might say, oh, it's easy. I'm just going to say the chart is about the changes that took place in 3 different areas of crime in Newport City Center from 2003 to 2012. After all, it's already given there. Oh no, do not do that, okay? Do not copy word for word what is given. So as an information to you, but instead, okay, rephrase this, okay? So do not copy word for word, because if you copy word for word, okay, the examiner won't really know that you have understood so what you're reading about. So you have to rephrase it, okay? And by rephrasing, somehow you're giving the impression that you studied the line, the graph, okay, the line graph, and you understood, okay, what these figures stands for. So when you are rephrasing, you have to answer three questions: the what, the where, and the when. Okay. So for example, when you say what, so what means go to the y-axis. It's the number of incidents, okay, of burglary, car theft, and robbery. Okay. When it happened in Newport City. Okay, you don't have to say Newport City Center. So it happened in Newport City. And from where? From 2003 to 2012. Okay, so that is what you could probably say. So this, or the line graph, okay, so shows, so the number of incidents of burglary, car theft, and person robbery, which happened in Newport City, so between 2003 to 2012. Okay, so that's a different way of saying what the graph is about, um, differently from what has been already provided to you. Okay, so that's the first tip. Okay, so rephrase, begin your composition by giving us information, giving the readers information, what is the graph about, by rephrasing what the information already provided. Okay. Now, another type, aside from, okay, so the line chart, we have also what we call the bar chart, okay? So the bar chart is similar to the line graph, okay? So, but the thing is, okay, so it has a different a way of presenting, so the data, okay? So, but it has the same parts as the line graph. So it has also the y-axis, okay, and the x-axis here, okay? So this time, let's go, let's read, okay? So what is this bar chart about? It says that the chart below shows the annual number of rentals and sales in various formats of films from a particular store between 2002 and 2011. So what is your task? Your task is to summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So you have two tasks here, okay? First, you summarize the information by selecting only the important features, and then you make comparison where relevant. And in this case, I think comparing is relevant because you are actually given three different information here, okay? So again, if you're going to introduce what the bar chart is about, okay, so maybe you can say that the chart below so shows the, let's say, yearly number of rentals of VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray sales, okay? So over a 10-year period, so from 2002 to 2011, okay? So about that time. So this means that that is again, okay, so how you would introduce, so the bar chart, all right? However, when, aside from introducing the bar chart, okay, so when you have actually done that, the second strategy is to look at the overall pattern. Okay, so once you have already provided the information about what the chart is about by rephrasing, okay, so the information already provided, the next step is to provide information on what do you think is the general pattern, okay, so that you see. So do not give specific details first, okay? Like you're already giving, for example, the number of sales, okay? Gross sales per year. So do not first focus on that, but focus only on the general trend without giving particular numbers or figures in your description, okay? So maybe in giving an overall trend, especially in bar or line graphs, you focus on the increase, okay, or the decrease, or for example, did it remain constant or stable, okay? or was there a fluctuation in the trend? Okay, so meaning there's a initial increase, okay, and a decrease later on, so that you could say there's a fluctuation, okay, so in the trend. So for example, in this case, we can see from this graph that there's generally an increase in terms of, look at this, Blu-ray sales, okay, so slight increase there. However, there's a decrease generally in the, when it comes to the rentals, okay, or the VHS. So look at this, the one in gray, all right, or DVDs, okay. But generally, when it comes to the Blu-ray sales, all right, so we can say that there's an increase, okay, and a slight decrease afterwards. So that is what you mean by giving information about the overall trend, okay? So focusing on the increase, decrease, okay, or constancy or fluctuation in the data. Okay, so that's another strategy. Next, what other charts, okay, so could be given to you? Well, you could also have the tables, okay? So this is an example of a table, okay? So if you look at this, it says here that the table shows sources of student income over a 10-year period in the United Kingdom. And your task is to write a report for a university lecturer describing the information shown below. Remember, in task 1, you should write at least 150 words, okay? So maybe you can go a bit beyond that, okay, maybe until 160, but remember, the longer composition you make in task 1, okay, so that means it will rob you of the time that you should devote to writing task 2. So we would really encourage you to stick to the number of words, okay? So maybe give or take 140 to 160 words, okay? So it would be fine. All right. Now, so what's the overall trend here? Okay, so if you're going to look at this, okay, particular table, so maybe you can see that the income of students, okay, so generally increased. So with a slight dip in annual income in the school year 1992 to 1993. Because if you're going to look at this, okay, so the annual income of the students, okay, so there's a general increase over the years except, okay, so for this year. All right. Now, how about this one? Okay, so in this case, so it says here, what could be the overall trend here? Okay, so the overall trend here is, maybe you can say that, or this is a comparison of transportation, the means of transportation used in 3 countries, okay, Britain, Australia, or Singapore. And what is the overall trend? Okay, so maybe you can say that in Britain and Australia, so apparently the car is the most often used means of transportation, whereas in Singapore, okay, so it's the public transport, which is often used so by the people. Okay, so do not mention any figures yet. That will be in the next section, okay? Also, when you are looking at tables, look at this. Because the table talks about data that was gathered from 1988 to 1999, that means that when you are describing the information, you should use the past tense, okay? So this means you could say that there was a general increase in the student income, okay? So over a 10 period, except a slight dip, okay? So in the income in the years 1992 to 1993, okay? So but you use the past tense. However, look at this second chart, table. You are not given here a time frame, okay? So you don't really know when this particular data was actually gathered. So what does it mean? This means that we have to use the present tense, okay? So you can say that this shows that most people in Britain and Australia, okay, use USE, okay, not used. So because you use the simple present tense, okay, so because you are not given a past time frame here. All right, so I hope that that's another tip for you. Be very careful with the verb tense, okay, so that you use. Okay, what about pie charts? Now, in a pie chart, so these are examples, okay, so of pie charts. So for example, here, it says here, the charts below show the average percentages in typical meals of 3 types of nutrients, all of which may be unhealthy if eaten too much, because we are talking about sodium, okay, we are talking about saturated fat, okay, and added sugar. So not really healthy, okay, you should know that, okay. So your task is to summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. All right. So sometimes look at this, okay? You can be given only 2 charts to compare, but in this case, you are given actually 3 charts, okay? So which somehow makes it more complicated. But usually when you're given pie charts, percentages, okay? So this is the kind of data given to you, percentages, okay? So for example, here you see the average percentage of sodium, saturated fat, and sugar present in meals typically consumed by Americans. Okay, so that's what the charts are about. So when you compare, okay, you have to provide details by referring to the figures provided. Okay, so if you're taking note of the strategies, okay, so which I'm giving you. So again, first begin the composition with an introduction of what the graph is about, okay, so by using your own words. Second, after that, you now give information on the overall pattern that you see, okay. So is there an increase, a decrease, okay, a stable, okay, uh, pattern, okay, or a fluctuation in the pattern, okay? And then after that, you go now into the details, okay? So when you go into the details, you now have to give specific figures or numbers, okay? So for example, in this case, you have 43%, okay, of sodium, 29%, okay? However, here's another tip for you, okay? You'll somehow be given a better score, okay, if you do not just copy what is provided to you in the graph, okay. So instead of just saying 43%, maybe you can say something like almost half, okay, of the maybe you can say almost half of the entire sodium intake, okay, are consumed at dinner meals. Okay, so instead of saying 43%, so maybe you can say nearly half or almost half. All right, so you might like to say that. Or in this case, you have here, for example, 23%, okay? So added sugar, so instead of saying 23%, then maybe you can say almost a quarter, okay? So almost a quarter of, for example, added sugar, okay, so are usually present at dinner time, okay, or dinner meals, okay? So that's another tip for you, okay? So you will be given a better band score, okay? So if you kind of vary your vocabulary use, okay? So and not just stick on what's given to you. All right, another type, okay, so of chart which could be given to you is a diagram or the process chart. Okay, so look at this. Sometimes you'll just be given this information, okay. So it says here that the diagram below shows how electricity is generated in a hydroelectric power station. So what is your task is to summarize, okay, the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Okay. Now, what makes a diagram or a process different from all the other charts is that you have to look at the words, okay, because it's composed of words, okay, it's composed of illustration. Okay, so look at those. Okay, so both of those way of conveying information. So for example, also remember that in process, okay, because it's, for example, it's a process, then make sure that you know where does it begin, where does the process begin, where does it end, okay? And for example, in terms of diagrams, usually you're going to be given their equipments probably, okay, or materials. So again, you have to, for example, make sure that you mention those resources, okay? For example, in terms of process, in this particular case, it starts from the river, okay, going to the dam, and then going to the power stations, and then going to the power lines, okay? Whereas, for example, the equipments that you have to mention in your composition would be, you have to mention the high-level reservoir, okay, or the low-level reservoir, the generators, or the reversible turbines, okay? And then what's also makes diagrams or process kind of more complex is that sometimes the chart or the diagram has certain nuances. Okay, like for example, in this case, look at this. You have to, for example, mention that the reservoir is open during daytime and closed at night. Okay, whereas at daytime, for example, the generator is used to power the national grid, whereas at night the pump water is actually pumped into the high level reservoir. Okay, so all of this must be incorporated in your composition. So the thing is, again, another strategy, okay, that I would suggest to you is to, before you actually start writing, you have to outline what you're going to say. Okay, so for example, you'd say, how am I going to actually describe this process, okay? So maybe you can just use bullet points, okay? So since, for example, you're only given 20 minutes so to write the first task, so this means that in this case, probably you should use up like 5 minutes, okay? So of those 20 minutes to plan, outline what you're going to say, so that once you have outlined what you're going to say, then it's very easy for you to start writing, okay? So rather than just, for example, just write whatever it is that comes to your mind. If you do that, I tell you, your composition would be disorganized, okay? Now, sometimes you'll be given maps, okay? Now look at this. It says here that you are going to tell the difference, okay? So what happened to Grange Park, okay? So from 1920, compare Grange Park, okay? So from 1920 to end up to the present, okay? So this is a kind of a map. So if you are given maps like this one, so accurate vocabulary, okay? And some examples of accurate vocabulary for maps, because maps means location, okay? So you have to use certain words pertaining to space. We call those as spatial words, okay? For example, phrases such as to the right, okay, to the left, adjacent to or opposite to, okay, or nearby the fountain, okay? So these are examples of words that you could use. So when you are actually given maps, don't worry, because I'm going to give you an example, okay, of these precious little words, okay, what we call transition words. So which could immensely help you organize, okay, so your composition. All right. Now, sometimes, again, well, sometimes the IELTS makes it quite complex, okay, because you will be given both a chart, okay, and a table. Okay, so such as like this. So again, if it's a chart, so you go over the X and Y axis, okay, so what is it about? And if it's a table, look at the figures, okay, and especially in this kind of table, there are arrows, okay, so here. So this means that um, You look at where the arrows are pointing. So in this case, of course, the arrow pointing up means an increase, okay? An arrow pointing downward means a decrease. So that means, again, you'd have to figure out a way to actually relate. So these two charts and table, in a way, they're just saying the same thing, okay? So that generally there's an increase, okay? So in the gross earnings, so when it comes to these products, except for gems and jewelry, so which registers a slight decrease in the sales. So the same information is actually presented in the table, but the table gives you the specific percentage, okay, of decrease or increase in the export earnings. Okay. All right. So again, if you have any questions, so just type them in a chat box later on, and I'll get back to you there. All right. So let's go over the assessment criteria for the task one. Okay. So what is expected of you? How do the examiner, okay, the writing examiner actually give you a score, okay, an overall band score? Now, these are the four criteria used. Okay. Task achievement or task response. So meaning, were you able to achieve, to actually give, okay, what is asked of you? Okay, so were you able to achieve the task? And the task is actually right there inside the box. Okay, so you have to be very careful that you really answer. Okay, so what is asked of you? And then another one is coherence and cohesion. This pertains to your organization. So that means, are you able to actually make sure that your composition is organized? Okay, so there is, for example, a clear progression between the sentences, okay, or from one paragraph to another. Okay. How about lexical resource? This only means vocabulary. So in vocabulary, have you used the appropriate words? Okay. And then, of course, the grammatical range and accuracy. So did you use correct grammar? Okay. Did you vary your sentence structure? All right. So each of this particular criterion will be given a band score. Okay. So remember, they're not just going to look at your composition and then give it an overall band score. No, they will give you a band score for each of this criterion. For example, it could mean that you can have a 5 for task achievement, a 6 for coherence and cohesion, a 6 for lexical resource, and a 6 for grammar. Okay, so and then they will your overall band score for writing task, okay, will be the average of the four criteria. Okay, so this means that you can actually have an average of a half band. Okay, so it could be a 5.5, okay, or a 6.5. So that could happen. But the examiner will only give you a whole band score. Okay, so the examiner won't really give you a 5.5 for task achievement. No, it's just either a 5, 6, 7, or 8 or 9. All right, so again, let me go over this. Okay, so of all the slides, okay, so in my presentation, this is what you should take note of, because this actually summarizes what is expected of you. Okay, so when it comes to task achievement, these are the things that you should take note of. Have you paraphrased the wording of the question? Okay, do you have an overview? As I've said, when you say overview, what is the general trend? Okay, how effectively have you identified, illustrated, and reported the key features of the information in the task? This is now going to the details. Okay, are your data accurate and complete? Have you shown figures? Have you met the word count required? Okay, so as I have said, aim for between 140 to 160 words. Okay, but no more than 160 words, please. Okay, otherwise you'll be losing time. Okay, and probably if it's too long, not only you'll get penalized when it comes to time, but you may actually get penalized for not achieving the task required in terms of word count. How about coherence and cohesion? How well are the information and ideas organized? Did you use paragraphs? Okay, so this means you have to make sure that, for example, the introduction, what is the graph about? And the overview could be one paragraph, okay? But when you now go into the details, all right, so maybe you can have a separate paragraph, okay? So usually the writing task is no more than it's only between 2 to 3 paragraphs. Okay, so no more than 3 paragraphs actually. Did you use transitions or linking verbs? Okay. What about vocabulary? What are they looking for in your composition? Did you use a range of vocabulary? So meaning, did you vary your words? Did you not use the same words again and again? Okay. How effectively did you use the words? Okay. Were they appropriate to the task? Okay. So I don't think the IELTS writing exam is the time for you to impress your examiner, but by using words which are highfalutin, okay, somehow, but is not really appropriate. Okay, so to what you're describing. So on the contrary, even if you use simple words, that's all right as long as it's appropriate. Okay. And then how about grammatical range and accuracy? Did you use a range of structures? Okay. How accurate are your spelling and grammar? So what does this mean? In that 20 minutes time frame given you to make your composition, maybe you could use up like 3 minutes of your time going over your spelling, okay, and grammar. So because when you start writing, I would suggest do not stop every now and then to check on your grammar. Okay, no, otherwise you'll just be bogged down. Okay, so when you start, remember the strategy is plan what you're going to write. Okay, outline what you're going to say. What is, for example, you may immediately, for example, write the what the graph is about. Okay, so but when it comes to focusing on the details, now you have to plan what you're going to say. Okay, so, and then later on, do not check your grammar at this point, do not check your spelling at this point, but use, for example, the last 2 or 3 minutes of your time. So to check your spelling and grammar. All right. So again, as I have said, this particular side is the most important because this summarizes, okay, so the strategies or the kind of information, okay, so that you should provide in your composition. This is what the examiner is going to look for. Well, of course, you can just go to the ielts.org website. Okay, so there's a particular part there which are downloadable resources. Okay, and you can certainly download the band descriptors. Okay, so for the IELTS test. So maybe I would suggest, okay, practice. So I'm sure there are lots of examples of graphs or charts available out there in the internet, or of course at the ielts.org website. So what you have to do is to practice. Okay, I would suggest after you have practiced, find a friend, okay, who could read the information. Okay, so your composition, give him or her this particular descriptor, and ask him, okay, ask him or her, your friend, to actually give you a band score based on this. Because this is actually what the examiner is also going to use when they give you, when they assess your composition. Okay, all right. So as I've said, this is the kind of rating that you could have. You may have a task achievement. Okay, so remember, why did you get a 5? Perhaps you got a 5 because you did not have an overview. You did not, for example, you merely repeated word for word. Okay, so the information about what the graph is about, okay, already provided in the exam. Okay, or your composition is very long, okay, such that you reach, let's say, 200 words. So instead of only 150. So that those could be, okay, so the possible reasons why you get 5, okay? So if you add all that, then your score could be a 5.5 instead of a 6, okay, probably, all right? So again, please make sure that the task achievement, okay, so could really pull down, okay? So your band score. All right, so plan what to write. Okay, so this will again summarize what I have been talking about so far. Your introduction, okay, would be your statement. Usually the introduction is just one sentence, okay? So state the type of graph and what does it show by paraphrasing the prompt, okay? So meaning the information already provided to you, okay? And then in the body, give the overall trend. That's what we call the overview, okay? So give the overall trend or the big picture, but without giving first details. When I say details, this means specific numbers, okay, or percentages, okay. So do not provide yet, okay. So just give an overall trend. So meaning increase, decrease, okay, fluctuation, okay, or constancy, okay. So in the pattern. And then in the next paragraph, then you now describe the key feature. Okay, so this time you use correct figures, percentages, or stages. Okay, but do not be tempted to actually just write everything that you see. No, when you are describing the key, that's the important word, the key. So meaning the important, those which actually stand out. Okay, so you don't have to describe every single little detail that is provided in the graph. Only when we say key features, the most significant, okay? So meaning which one has the greatest increase or the least increase, okay? The biggest, the least, okay? So the smallest figure, okay? So those are key features. And then, of course, clarify what time period you're explaining. So again, if it's in the past, it's data from the past, then you have to use the verb tense, the past tense. Okay. Otherwise, if the particular time frame is not given, then use the present tense, a simple present tense, not the present, present progressive tense. Okay. Divide your composition into paragraphs. But please, this is very important, don't interpret the data. What does this mean? If you're given there an example of, for example, there's an increase in the sales, do not give assumptions of what caused the increase. Because it's not given in the graph, then you are not supposed to conjure, okay? So certain assumptions, all right? So just stick to the data given you. Okay, do not interpret the data because after all, the first task is only meant to gauge how you're able to describe, okay, and not really interpret the data. All right, now let's go individually to each of the criterion, okay, for task one. All right, task achievement. What does this mean? Okay. So when it comes to task achievement, so what is the degree to which task was completely answered? Okay. Did you actually sufficiently responded? Okay, so using the approximate number of words. Okay, are all the important details included? Are they sufficient details? Are they accurate? Okay, and for example, did you provide a clear overview of the diagram? Okay. Let's have an example here. Okay, so why are you given a 7, a 6, or a 5 band score for task one? Okay. For example, you're given a 5 if there's no clear overview. Again, as we have said, after you have rephrased the prompt, what is the general trend that you see in this graph? Okay. If you do not provide a clear overview, meaning after reading your composition, they are confused, okay, about whether you understood really the general pattern, okay, so shown by the graph, then I'm afraid you will immediately get a 5 for that, okay. However, if you have, you'll be given a 6, okay, if you present an overview with information appropriately selected. So this is what I mean by when you provide the overview, do not go into the details, okay? only look for the most or the least. Okay, so which particular feature or data stands out. Okay, however, you will get the 7 if you present a clear overview of main trends, differences, or stages. So meaning, um, once the examiner reads your overview, they will agree with what you have said. Okay, so as presented in the diagram. So what is a clear overview? An overview or the general trend clearly summarizes the most significant trend or feature from the data or information in the diagram. Again, the keywords are most significant, okay? So trends or features. It is not simply an introduction to the topic, okay? So remember, usually we introduce the composition, okay? So by rephrasing the prompt, okay? But this one is a very important aspect, okay? Because when you provide a clear overview, it already gives the examiner an idea that, oh, you have understood the diagram because you know you're able to immediately zero in. So on the most important or the most significant trend or feature, okay? All right, now let's look at this, okay? So a bar graph, okay? So of UK telephone calls, all right? So what could be the overview for this graph? Okay, so I'm going to give you, let's say a minute or two. So can you go over this bar graph? What could be the overview? Okay, so when we say overview, the general, okay, trend, the most significant feature that you see, okay, here. So in your mind, I want you to zero in on the most significant feature, all right? And then later I'm going to ask you something later on, okay? So if you were to make a composition, what would be your overview here? Okay, so, all right, let's have an example. Would you consider this, for example, as this one first, okay? Would you consider this as a good or a bad overview, okay, or trend? So again, can you type in the chat box, okay? Good or bad? Overall, there were many significant changes in the figures, okay? Good or bad? So type in the chat box, okay? Bad with a question mark, GN, all right. That's our, okay. The others are more certain now. Bad, bad, bad. Okay. Why is this bad? I wonder. Okay. How about this one? How about the next statement? Sorry about that. Overall, the local fixed lines were used the most. Okay. So are this good or bad overview? Type in the chat box. Okay, bad, bad. Oh, okay, good or better. All right. So I think in this second statement, okay, so there's a mixed evaluation here. Some says bad, okay, some says good. So I wonder, but these are really bad examples, okay? So bad examples because, first of all, in the first statement, what were the significant changes? Okay, so it's very vague. All right, so and most of you were able to get that. This is a bad example, okay? But in the second one, overall, the local fixed lines were used the most, okay? Why is that somehow bad? Okay, so let's go to the, let's go to the graph, okay? So in this case, if you merely say, for example, that the local fixed lines were used the most, okay? Used the most when, okay? So this means we're not given a date, okay? So when was it exactly used the most? When you say local fixed lines, this or this, okay? So when, okay, so is it consistent? So you did not focus, for example, look at this, there's a slight fluctuation, okay? So first, we can see that the local fixed lines, okay, so have been used the most until 1999. But after that, okay, so its usage started to decrease, okay? So this means that this is what you should actually focus on. So you have to be specific with the changes, okay? So with the increase, the decrease. So when you provide your overview. Okay, how about this one? This one, okay, so it's what we would consider as a better, okay, so overview. Usually you use the words overall, these are what we call transition words, okay? Overall, in general, okay, so because if you use those transition words, you are giving the idea to your examiner, to the examiner, that you are giving the overview, okay? So you say in general or overall. In general, the duration of national and international fixed line calls and mobile calls increased, whereas local fixed line calls rose, then fell over the period to its original level. Okay, so that is indeed a better way of putting it. So you're able already to, yes, okay, it only focused on the um, local, okay, so local and fixed lines, okay, so, but it also focuses on what also happened, okay, what changes happened to national and international fixed line calls and mobile calls. So you see that generally the trend was increase, okay, except for the local fixed lines, okay. So when there is this slight increase, okay, and then so a decrease, okay, a decreasing trend after that. So aim for this kind of overview. Okay, it's only one sentence. Okay, but it already provides us the most important information in this particular graph. All right, so that is an example. So let's have a few more examples. Okay, look at this. So number one, again, go over the chat box. Okay, so Australia had the highest percentage of working women. Is that a good or a bad overview? So again, go to the chat box. I want to see your answer. Okay, a question. Can we write the figure such as year in overview? Um, Usually you provide the year, okay, so when you provide the information on what is the graph about, okay, so which is before the overview, okay, so that is what you call the prompt. You restate the prompt, okay, so you don't have to actually repeat that information so in the overview. So usually, again, as we have said in the overview, no details as yet. Do not focus on percentages, okay, or numbers. So, but focus on the general trend. Okay, so most of you says this is bad. You are right. Okay, so again, because it does not provide information. What's the trend? Okay, so overall, Australia had the highest percentage of working women. Working women. Okay, so meaning, is that a comparison between working men and working women? So we're not really sure here. Okay, so how about the second? Overall, it can be seen that X was the highest and Y was the lowest. Good or bad? Okay, some of you says good, some of you says bad, okay? But actually, this is what we would still consider as a bad, okay, overview. So meaning, it can be seen that X was the highest in what? Okay, and lowest in what? So it has to be clear. So remember, your overview must stand alone. So meaning, when the examiner actually reads that sentence, and then when they look at the graph, okay, then they know exactly what you're talking about. So a bad overview means they still have a lot of questions in their mind. Okay, although you're not giving here figures, all right. So just for example, say just how high is it or just low it is, but at least you have to give information on high in what in what particular characteristic, okay, or in what particular aspect. All right, how about number 3? In general, it can be seen that the process consisted of 7 stages, good or bad. So now you're starting to weigh the sentences more, okay? So most of you says bad, okay? Leia and May, for example. All right. Okay, so bad. Yes, you're right, okay? So because it can be seen that the process consisted of 7 stages. So, but for me, some of the questions I might ask as an examiner would be, yes, the process consists of 7 stages, but what particular significant aspect of the process was striking there? Okay, so this means that you were not able to pinpoint the significant, okay, so aspect of the process. Okay, how about the next one? Overall, we can see the process started with the gathering of cocoa beans and finally chocolate is made. Good or bad? Okay, May says bad. How about the others? Bad? Okay, good. Okay, so according to Gian, all right. Just because the sentence is kind of longer, okay, so doesn't really make it good. So again, some of the questions that the examiner might ask here would be, you just started with the first process and then the last, okay? So, but probably you can focus on the nuance, okay? So of the process, okay? So again, the distinctive feature which stand out in the making of the chocolate, okay? So it's probably not given emphasis here. Okay, so ito naman, this might be a better way, okay, of saying it. So for example, if it's a process, then say in general, it can be seen that the process consisted of stages, including the preparation of the fish, the cooking and smoking stages, and finally packaging and delivery. So this means that although you did not focus on specific details, but at least you specified, okay, so what are these stages? So in that particular process, okay? So overviews is critical. Okay, so in conveying the impression that you are immediately able to notice, okay, so what is significant in this particular figure. All right, let's go to the next. Now, how about this one? Okay, so what about if you are given this map? Okay, so here you have to take note, okay, so of what is actually given you in this case. Okay, so have a look at this particular map, okay, so and see what is the difference so between then and now. Okay, so what for example, if you're going to provide an overview for this, okay, so what could it be? All right, so again, here we have left out the prompt. So you just have to figure out on your own what could this particular map be talking about. Okay, so there are two. So there are two graphs here or maps here. Okay, so what could this be about? Okay. So I have here 3. Okay, I have here 3 possible overviews. Which do you think is the best one? 1, 2, or 3? Okay, so type in the chat box. So just type 1, 2, or 3. Okay, so meaning which do you think is the best overview? Okay, so 3, the thumb says 3. Okay, without a question mark. All right. 1, okay, 1. So between 1 and 3. All right. So I think you can decide. Okay, so between 1 and 3. All right. Yes, let's focus on statement 1. In 2005, there were less trees and more buildings than before. True. Okay, so yes, indeed, if you see that, okay, so there were fewer trees. Okay, so afterwards, so years later. All right. How about 3? The town changed from a green residential area into a more urbanized one. 3 is a better overview because you tend to look at the overall picture and not focus on the details. So somehow a good overview is like looking at the forest, okay? So rather than the trees, whereas a not so good overview is simply focusing on the trees and missing the forest. All right? So you remember that metaphor. So when you provide an overview. So here, the writer here, when he was able to evaluate that the town changed from a green residential area, so because of the trees, okay, into a more urbanized one. Okay, so the trees were cut. Okay, so and then there's already the building. Okay, so of this infrastructures. Okay, factories, supermarket, which all somehow gives the impression that it has turned into a more urbanized area. Okay, so a good overview somehow interprets. Okay, so what you see here. Okay, so giving us an overview, okay, of the whole picture before you go into the details. So perhaps in the details, and you can say the trees were cut, okay, and then this infrastructures were actually built, okay, something like that. All right. So I hope this is getting to be very enlightening for you. Okay. All right. So again, let's look at this. Okay. After the overview, the next area, okay, so or the next part of your composition is to focus on the key features or the details. So you get a 6, for example, if you present and highlight the key features, but the details are irrelevant, inappropriate, or inaccurate. So this means it's very important that you focus on details which are relevant to what you have said. Like, for example, if you have said in the overview that the place has been changed, okay, so from into an urban area, then the features, okay, the feature which you must emphasize in the next part should be the cutting of the trees, okay, and the building of the infrastructures to show that it has changed into an urbanized area. Okay, you get a inappropriate, okay, or inaccurate. But you get a 5 if you just recount the detail mechanically with no clear overview. Okay, maybe you do not provide data to support what you have said. Okay, or you inadequately cover uh, key features or bullet points. So meaning perhaps the details that you have provided are not really the key ones. Okay, so it's inadequate. And then of course 4. Hopefully we don't get a 4. Okay, but you will get a 4 if we do not cover all the key features or the bullet points. Okay, and it somehow the information that you provide sounds confusing. Okay, so perhaps the data that you provided are inaccurate because so it rendered it confusing for the examiner. Okay, so we aim for a 7, remember? Okay, so but getting a 6 so means some of the details may be irrelevant. So if you get a 7, if you're aiming for a 7, that means that all the details that you should provide there should be accurate, okay, and relevant to the overview which you have provided. Okay, now what about charts, static charts? Okay, in static charts, what do you mean by static charts? This means that there's no comparison. Okay, I mean, usually this is not just, for example, the data. You're not asked to compare data. Okay, but you are just given one single information. Okay, for example, look at this. So this is an example of a static chart because usually it does not ask you to compare over the years. Okay. So, but you're just given, for example, an information about what Canadian children and youth uh, attaining selected physical activity criteria. Okay. So this means there are no years. Okay. So for example, provided. But this is certainly a comparison between the physical activity of boys and girls. Okay, so over in, for example, at least 1 day, at least 3 days, or at least 6 days. So what's their physical activity? Okay, now look at this. Now what I want you to do is there are here are examples. Okay, so on top of this screen, you can see here examples of words. Okay, use those words to fill in the blank. Okay, so in this composition. So can you do that? So for example, for number one of the choices, so which do you think would be the most appropriate word to fill in the blank for number one? Okay, so again, please use the chat box. Okay, so type in the word. Is it ayan. So girls over half, boys 1/3. Okay, so these are some of the uh, words which you could use. 12 to 17, 5, 6, close to 10%. Okay, so among these choices, okay, so on the top most part of the screen, okay, so which could be the best word or phrase that we could use to fill in the blank. The bar chart shows the amount of time that blank-year-olds in Canada spend per week on sport and exercise. Okay, 12 to 17. Okay. So let's see. Tingnan nga natin. Of course. Okay. How about for number two? It is clear from the chart. So this is now the overview that blank are less active in their leisure time than blank. Okay, so what's your answer for two? Okay, girls. So tingnan natin. So this means for three, that means boys. Okay. Yes, you are right. Okay. So that's an example of an overview. There is a noticeable difference between the percentage. Sorry, this should be difference. There's a noticeable difference between the percentages of boys and girls who participate in sport for more than an hour 3 times a week. Okay. About of girls devote an hour of their time 3 times a week to active leisure pursuits. About blank of girls. So what do you think? Okay. Yan, tama. Okay. 80%? Would that be 1/3? Okay. So parang wala ang 80%. Okay. So it's more of 1/3, although merong 80%. Okay. So, but it's different. 1/3 is different from 80%. How about your answer to 5? About 1/3 of girls devoted over an hour of their time 3 times a week to active leisure pursuits, while this applies to blank of the boys. Ayun. So what do you think? Okay. So baka dito na. Baka dito na yung sinasabi natin na over half, okay, of the boys. Over half. So meaning, look at this. So more than 50. Okay, so 53. So that's over half. Nailagay ko na pala. There's a similar difference between the there's a difference between the percentages of active young people. Almost 1 in 10 boys between the ages of 12 and 17 play sport for an hour at least 6 days a week. Okay, so at least 6 days. So between almost 1 in 10 boys. Okay, so dito siya. The figure for young women is only what? So if it's 1 in 10, so this means 10%, okay? This is 10%. So how about for women? This is, maybe we could, what particular word, okay? So could you use there? 1 in 20, okay? So meaning you round it off, okay? You round off, so 20%, 1 in 20. A closer examination of the figures, okay, for young people who actually participated in physical activity reveals that the greatest proportion dedicate, okay, at least blank per week to these pastimes. Okay, so how many? How many? So please type in the chat box your answer. So again, look at the choices here at the top of your screen. Yan. Ano kaya dyan? So I hope you can see now, okay? So that instead of merely just saying, for example, 73, 35, 29, you hear in this kind of composition, you are given the impression that you'll be given a better band score. So if you kind of rephrase, okay? So how the details are provided. So instead of saying, for example, 33%, then you say 1/3, okay? Instead of saying merely saying 50%, okay, or being very exact like 53, okay, then you can say over half. All right, instead of saying 21, for example, 21 boys, so you say 1 in 20. Okay, so you can somehow round off. Okay, so when you are describing the figures, so I hope you get the drift. So for example, here you say the greatest proportion dedicate at least 3 per week to these pastimes, okay, because we can see here, okay, so this the greatest proportion dedicate, because this one it would be the average, okay. This is true of about 80% of both boys and girls, okay. So here, so when we talk about the duration, okay, of 3 times a week of physical activity. So the fact that girls generally spend close to 10% less time on average on physical activities than boys raises questions about how fit young women are in comparison to young men. Okay, so this one is I think an interesting conclusion. Okay, so to end the composition, so although it's not focusing on interpreting the data, okay, it still focuses on the fact. Okay, so that fewer, okay, so fewer girls, for example, spend time in physical activities so than boys. So I hope you get the drift. Okay, so again, this is another tip for you. Rephrase, okay? So the way the figures, the details are given. So there are many ways of actually you putting it in your own words. Okay. So let's have a few more examples. How about students' favorite subjects? So what if you're given a bar chart and a pie chart at the same time? Okay. So have a look at this, and then later on, I'm again going to give you a question about this. So what do you think? We're now focusing on details, okay? So focusing on static charts. So how would you look at the details here? Okay, so let's have hopefully a simpler exercise this time. So, but this time you're not anymore given words, okay? So to fill in the blank. So why don't you actually fill in the blanks? The chart shows blank. So can you fill in the blank? The chart shows it need not be a complete sentence, okay? So it's just a phrase. The chart shows blank. So can you type in the chat box, please? The chart shows. You just have to rephrase, for example, what's given you in the title. Census of students' favorite subjects. Okay, so that's a good another way to rephrase that, Gladys. Okay, so a census of students. Okay, so that tells me that you're starting to get the drift now of rephrasing. Okay, so the prompt. Okay, that's good. Thank you, Glad. That's one way. Okay, another way is saying, for example, the chart shows the favorite subjects of students. Okay, so because instead of saying just sticking to what it's given, you can merely rearrange the words. Okay, the y-axis shows. Okay, so can you fill in the blank? What does the y-axis show? All right. Remember the y-axis. Okay, good. The total population of students, the subjects. Okay, so let's see. The number of students, right? You're correct, May. How about for number 3? Most students' favorite subject is, look at the chart. What is the student's most favorite subject? Okay, so Gladys says math. It is indeed math. Okay, Black students enjoy science most. How will you fill this? What particular word could you use to fill in the sentence? Black students enjoy science most. Maybe it's just an average portion. Okay, so let's see. Glad. Thank you, Glad, for your active participation. Almost 100. Okay, good. 90 students. Okay, it's not really percent. Okay, so it's more of a number. So 90 students enjoy science most. Good. And how about the fifth sentence? 100 students enjoy blank the most. So how would you complete this? Okay, PE. So let's see if Gladys is correct. Yes, PE. Okay. So when it comes to going into the details, so that's we're practicing here being accurate. Okay. So this means that you make sure, okay, so that when you describe, okay, so the details go for accuracy. Let's have further practice on this, okay, but this time multiple choice, okay. So this, I hope this is kind of easier. The smallest section shows, is it science, technology, or history? So please type in the chat box, okay, A, B, or C for 6. Okay, so B. So tingnan nga natin. Yes, you are correct. Okay, how about 7? What is colored in orange? A, B, or C? Okay. So A. Tingnan nga natin kung A talaga. Okay. Let's see. Yes, you are correct. Okay, it's English. How many students like history most? Is it A, B, or C? History. Okay, A. Okay, so some says B. So tingnan nga natin between A or B, ano kaya? It's more of B. Okay, so 110. All right. Which two subjects make up 200 students? Is it history and science, history and P, or science and P for number 9? Which two subjects make up 200 in total? So this would mean adding maths here, your addition, okay? So would be adding skills would be tested. All right, so it's A. Most of you says A. So tingnan nga natin. Yes, history and science. And how about number 10? True or false? The information in this chart is the same, okay, as the chart above. So meaning the pie chart is the same as the bar chart. True or false? Okay, A. So meaning true. Yes, it's true. Okay, so this is just an example of when you're now looking at the details. So only pick the one, okay? So which is, for example, very significant. Like for example, 20, so might not be too significant. So maybe you need not actually include technology as part of the details, okay? But certainly those which have higher numbers, okay? So might be a part of your or maybe or if you think that you could mention 20, okay, so because this is significant in the details because it's the least, okay, so it's the subject, so which is the least favorite of students, so you may also include that, but you need not actually mention all of these subjects, okay, so focus only on the ones in the middle perhaps, okay, so may not be given or devoted much space in your composition. Now let's go to the next task, which is coherence and cohesion, okay. Now remember, when we say coherence, the flow of your writing, okay, so how does, for example, your sentence flow from one sentence to the next, from one paragraph to the next? That's what you call coherence, okay? So your idea should be logically sequenced, easy to follow and understand, okay? So what is the sort of like, what is the logic, okay? So, or what is the connection between sentences or between paragraphs? But when we say cohesion, this means these are the linking words that you use to help connect the ideas, okay? And show relationship between paragraphs, sentences, or part of the sentences. So if coherence means the logic, okay? So of one paragraph to the next, okay? So for example, why did you mention this first, okay? And then mention this next. But cohesion refers to the specific words that you use to link, okay, or connect ideas together. So this means here, coherence and cohesion means how well did you organize, okay? So your paragraphs through the use of linking words, okay. One way to actually provide this is more of cohesion, okay? Sorry, coherence, okay? So in your particular composition is to use referencing and substitution. So this means you don't have to repeat the same noun again and again. For example, look at this information. It says here, with regard to mobiles, the highest ownership was seen in Iceland, where 90% of the population owned one. Okay, so one refers to what? Is it population? Is it Iceland? Is it ownership? Is it mobiles? Okay, so this means sometimes you may have to use pronouns, okay, to substitute for the noun so that you don't keep on repeating the same noun again and again. So for example, in this case, one means the mobile phone. How about look at this second sentence. Billions of tons of carbon dioxide and other toxic substances are released into the air every year from the fossil fuels. These gases eventually polluted the oceans and form a weak acid. Okay, So here, these, so meaning, what is this particular pronoun, okay, it's used to refer to the carbon dioxide and other toxic substances. So pronouns, okay, so these are little words, but these are precious words, okay, so to actually use in your composition, so to give the impression that you know how to link, okay, you know the connection of one particular idea with another, okay. So using referencing and substitution prevents you from repeating the same word again and again. Now, I'm also going to give you examples of transition words, okay? So for cohesion, okay? So maybe you'd like to use, for example, furthermore, for example, if you're asked to describe a process, then you can say first, second, third, finally, okay? Or if you're asked to provide many ideas, and say in addition, okay? Moreover, so these are precious little words, okay, which you could use for your coherence and cohesion task. How about time signals? So if, for example, the graph given you so somehow talks about past, present, and future, then you can use this, okay? So for example, first, before, meanwhile, soon, afterwards, okay. Space signals, if you're given maps, this one are precious words that you could turn to. So you say opposite side, to the left, adjacent to, okay, underneath, right. Contrast. So usually if you're asked to compare, let's say 2 or 3 graphs together, then you're bound to use contrast signals. So you say, however, in contrast, although, okay, so this means that there's a contradiction in the data given. However, if the graph given you somehow have similarity, okay, then you can use similarity signals. Then you can say in the same way, likewise, similarly, all right. In some cases, there are some diagrams, for example, which provides examples. Then maybe you can say giving example signals. For instance, specifically, okay. And then cause and effect, although these are rare. So because usually cause and effect would mean already interpreting on our part. Usually you use cause and effect perhaps in task 2, okay? But not really in task 1. And then of course, if you're now going to conclude, then you can say therefore, or in short, or to summarize, okay? Usually in task 1, you don't need to have a separate concluding paragraph, okay? All right. So again, these are precious little words. So even me, okay, so when I write my papers, I would turn to this list, okay, so for me to guide me in my composing of essays. All right, so remember, what are the examiners after, okay, when they give you a band score for coherence? So you make sure if you're given a 5, if your composition somehow gives only information with some organization, okay, but they can't really make sense of the rationale for your organization. And then there's a lack of overall progression. So meaning they can't really understand, okay, so why did you begin with this information first? Okay, so you have to, there must be a logic, okay? Did you begin, for example, with a from most to least or least to most, okay? So that's if you do that, then I think you'll get a better band score. You also tend to make inadequate, inaccurate, or overuse of cohesive devices. All right. Now, again, although I have given you the list of cohesive devices, okay, please don't overuse them, okay? So don't always say, in addition, okay? And then after every word or two, they say, on the other, or for example, in addition, moreover, okay? So this means this should be used sparingly, okay? So not all the time. So do not fill all your composition with lots of transition devices. And then you tend to be repetitive, okay? Whereas you're given a 6 if you arrange your information coherently, okay? You use cohesive devices effectively, okay, not overusing them. And you may not always use referencing clearly or appropriately. So sometimes you may use some cohesive devices inappropriately, okay? However, you get a 7 if you logically organize the information ideas and you use a range of cohesive devices appropriately, okay? Not overusing, but wherever they are needed, okay? Let's go to the next criterion, lexical resource, your vocabulary. Now, what are the examiners looking for? You get a 6 if you have an adequate range of vocabulary, so meaning you tend to repeat the same word again and again, okay? Although they may be appropriate, yes, but you use less common vocabulary, okay? But you get a 5 if you have a limited range of vocabulary, meaning you tend to repeat the same word again and again, okay? But you'll get a 7 if you vary your choice of words, okay? It's sufficient range of vocabulary. Don't, for example, use gargantuan when you can mean big, okay? They're not really after, the examiners aren't really after, as I have said, big words, okay? But you just make sure that they are not necessarily single words, okay? Not necessarily about cliches and metaphors. So don't, for example, be metaphoric if you cannot really afford to be metaphoric, okay? But just focus on being precise, okay? And that is what's important to your examiners. Okay, so let's go to dealing with numbers. Again, this one has something to do with vocabulary, okay? So how would you describe this? Look at this particular highlighted, okay? So portion of the pie chart. Would you consider that as 1 in 5, 20%, or a fifth? Pwede yan, okay? So ibig sabihin, any of those, okay? So could be given. So this means there are many ways, okay? So of saying that. So you don't have to just copy what is actually given. So in the prompt. For example, here, if it's already 1/4, then you can say a quarter, 25%, or 1 in 4. In this case, you can say a third, just over 30%, or 1 in every 3. Okay. Here you can say 50%, half, or 1 in every 2. Or in this case, 3 in 4, 75%, or 3/4. Okay. So this means that you might like to vary. So your a choice of words, okay, or phrases to mean the same thing. Now, if you want more examples about this, you can certainly just go to this particular site, okay? So go to ielts.org, roadtoielts.com, all right? And you can even listen to some examples of good examples of task 1 answers there, okay? And then let's now go to the last criterion, grammatical accuracy. Okay, in grammatical accuracy, what are you expected to remember? So remember, grammar has always involves the verb tense, okay? Will you use the past, the future, or the present tense, okay? Remember, present tense is used if there's no time frame given, okay? So you're not sure about the time frame of the data. Talk about what has changed. When you talk about what has changed, then it will always, of course, it would involve grammar. If you say increased, decreased, okay, so that involves grammar. Removing the agent or actor means using, for example, the active and the passive voice. Like, for example, if you say the oil price increased, okay? So this means that that is, for example, using the passive voice, okay? Whereas when you say the, for example, an active voice means there's really an agent or an actor doing. Okay, so the action. Okay, so for example, you say the students um, liked the subject of mathematics. Okay, so that would mean active voice. Okay, so you have to determine, would it be better for me to remove the agent or the actor, or is the actor, okay, important? So if the actor is important, then use the active voice. Then of course, grammar would also be important when you're making comparison, okay, as well as punctuation. So please remember, one idea, one sentence, okay? Although you can combine, for example, two ideas in one sentence, but with the use of transition words like, for example, but or and, okay? So that would make your sentence structure more complex. However, punctuation, you have to, after every idea, you have to make sure that you provide a period. Okay, so again, if you use a variety of complex structures, you produce sentences which are free of errors, you have good control of your grammar, then you could get a 7 for that, okay? But you only would get a 6 if you use a mix of simple and complex sentence forms, okay? But not really a variety of complex structures. And then you make some errors in grammar, okay? Although they would not really call it a major flaw in conveying your idea, but it could somehow sometimes be confusing. Then that could be a 6, okay? However, they'll give you a 5 if you only use a limited range of grammatical structures or sentences, and you attempt complex sentences, but they tend to confuse, okay, the readers, and your grammatical errors and punctuation may be faulty, that it would cause difficulty for the reader, okay? All right, so look at this. We're now nearing the end, okay? So, but I just want you to go over this particular example, okay? So it says here that the chart shows the hours spent per week on sport and exercise by young people in England. Now, you should write a report for a university lecturer describing the information shown below. Now, if the instruction says write a report for a university lecturer, then that means that the tone of your composition should be for academic tone, okay? Because your target audience is a university lecturer, okay? So you make sure that the tone of your composition in academic writing tasks has really an academic tone. So do not, for example, use slang, okay, or street language or contractions. So contractions means you use don't instead of spelling it as do not, okay? So in academic writing tasks, so please spell out, okay, and don't use contractions. So that's still part of grammar. Okay, let's have an example answer. I would like to show you this time, okay? Look at this. When it comes to grammar, make sure that you use consistently the same tense. Now, this one is using the present tense. The bar shows the amount of time that 16 to 24-year-olds in England spend per week on sport and exercise. Okay, spend. So 24-year-olds. Remember, subject-verb agreement, okay? If the subject is plural, then you just use the verb form, okay? So the verb form. However, if the subject is singular, then you usually add an s, okay? So to the main verb form, okay? So here, spend per week. It is clear from the start that young women are less active in their leisure time than young men. So is and are, okay? So you should be used appropriately. So depending on the number of the subjects. There is a striking difference, okay? Between the percentage of men and women who prefer, okay? So because the subject now is men and women, so you use prefer. Okay. Almost half of young women devote. Okay. So because again, the subject is still plural, women. While this, okay, what is when you say this? No time at all to active leisure pursuits, while this applies to only about a quarter of young men. So this means time, okay? So the time applies to only about a quarter of young men. There is a similar difference, okay? 16 and 24 play sport, ages 16 and 24, so that makes it plural. The figure for young women is only 5%, okay? Young people who actually play sport, okay? So because the subject is people, so the verb is play, reveals, okay? So because it says here that a closer examination of the figures for young people who actually play sport reveals. So reveals here is talking about the examination, okay? So the examination reveals that the greatest proportion dedicate between 1 and 3 hours per week to these pastimes, okay? So what does dedicate refer to? The greatest proportion of people. Okay, so it's talking about young people. So again, still focusing on plural. Okay, subject. This is true. Okay, the fact that only 2/5 of young women spend. Okay, 2/3 of young men compared to approximately 2/3 of young men raises question the fact. Okay, it's referring to the fact. So this means that you should use uh, um, the correct, okay? So a verb form to refer to the singular subject. Okay, so subject verb agreement is very important. Okay, indicator of a good composition. Okay, so I hope you remember that. Okay, how about past simple? So this is just easy. Like for example, the main verb form is in parentheses. Okay, so can you tell me the past tense form of this one? Look at this one. Let's look at this pie chart. This talks about the minutes spent per day on leisure activities in the UK in 1961. So because it's 1961, then in your composition, you must consistently use the past tense form of the verb. Okay, like for example, watch. Of course, you know about this already, okay? So it's watched. How about listen? So you just add an ed, listened. On average, they spend. So sometimes the past tense form of the verb, okay, need not be added with only an ed, okay? But it has a different form, like this one. The past tense of spend is spent. How about the past tense of come? After that came other unspecified pastimes, which take up, instead of saying take up, which took up, okay, about an hour and quarter a day. How about not seem? How do you turn that into this past tense form? People did not seem, okay? Um, Usually this is a common error of Filipinos. If you use did, most Filipinos would still put an ed after the second verb because there are two verbs here, did and seem. Okay, common errors of Filipinos would say people did not seemed. Okay, for example, you say I did not ate my breakfast. All right, if you use did, the second verb must be in its main form. Okay, so I hope you remember that. If you use did, okay, so as a past tense form, so the second verb do not actually, you just use the main form of the verb, okay, without turn it into another, to its past tense form too. As this account, okay, accounted is the past tense form. How about eat out? Ate out. How about go? So we know that the past tense is went, entertain is entertained, and then play, of course, is played, and then walk is walked. So what I'm trying to say here is that if the data, okay, is giving you information which actually happened in the past, which was gathered in the past, consistently please use the past tense form, okay, consistently. Otherwise, if you started out with the past tense and then halfway through you use the present tense, okay, or the future tense, then it will lead to confusion, okay? So about the time frame, so of the idea. All right, look at this, okay? So this particular graph says the chart shows participation in certain leisure activities by children in Australia. So again, your task is to write a report for a university lecture describing the information shown. Okay, look at this. I want you to, this time, I want you to spot the mistakes. Okay? Okay, there are 4 paragraphs here. What I want you to do is to spot the mistakes. How many mistakes can you spot in paragraph 1? Okay? Maybe what I mean by mistake is that it could be a mistake in grammar. It could be a mistake in facts, perhaps, based on the chart. Okay? So how many mistakes can you spot? Okay? Uh, for a moment. So while you go over this compositions, please spot how many mistakes can you spot per paragraph. Okay, and then can you type it in the chat box? All right. So in the first paragraph, so could you, I wonder, so are you still there? Okay, you're still with me. Okay. So how many mistakes can you spot here in the first? Is it 1, 2, or 3, 4, 5? I don't know. Okay. Again, the mistakes could be a mistake in grammar or a mistake in fact. Just give me figures, please. Okay. How many mistakes could you spot here? In paragraph 1, anyone? How many? Okay, 2. Sige, may mga none? Okay. We're just after the first paragraph, all right? So let's see. Actually, in the first paragraph, okay, the chart is showing. So remember, as I have said, if you are starting to give the information about what the chart is about, use the simple present tense. Okay? Do not use the present progressive form of the tense, like showing, okay, or presenting. Just use the simple form of the verb. So if it's chart, then that means the chart shows. Okay? So shows because remember the subject verb agreement. Okay. So the chart shows the numbers. You don't say the numbers, you say the number of boys and girls in Australia who take part in 5 different leisure activities. If you, this one is also not correct. Overall, we can say that boys' participation in these activities was greater than that of girls. So boys' participation, okay, in these activities was greater than that of girls. I think, okay, I wonder why was actually sorry, but I think this one is correct because the subject is really talking about not boys, okay, but their participation. Okay, so which makes it singular. Okay, so okay, I think I now get it. It is correct when it comes to subject verb agreement, but it's not correct because you use was when in fact there's no time frame given here, which means you have to use the present tense. So we say overall, we can say that boys' participation in these activities is greater than that of girls. Okay, so I hope you get this now because there's no time frame, so you cannot use the past tense. Okay. How about in the second paragraph? Can you spot the mistakes here? How many do you think can you spot? It's immediately clear that the most popular leisure time activity among this age group is watching television. Almost all children in Australia are spending their free time this way, and this is true for both boys and girls. However, in 3 of the 4 remaining activities, boys' participation was significantly greater than that of girls. So seemingly you might say, is there really an error here? Okay. So sabi ni Danica 2. Okay. Let's see, which could be the mistake here. All right. Almost all children in Australia are spending their free time. Again, because you have to use consistently the simple present tense. Okay. So you have to state here, almost all children in Australia spend their free time. Okay. Another error. However, in 3 of the 4 remaining activities, boys' participation is significantly greater. Okay. So I hope you're now starting to get the drift. How about in the third paragraph? Can you spot the mistakes here? Could be a mistake in grammar. It could probably be a mistake in fact, okay, based on the information provided. So what do you think? How many mistakes? Okay, so can you see? Okay, let's see. Okay. Wala pa. So perhaps some of you might say, in terms of grammar, this is all right. Okay, so it's actually using the simple present tense. All right, like is. But what could be wrong with this particular paragraph? Okay, so Sarah was able to pinpoint 3. Let's see. What could be wrong is that 4 out of 5 boys enjoy these games compared to almost 3 in 4 girls. Look at the chart. Is it really factual? Okay. So in terms of playing computer games, okay, look at this. So it says here that 5 boys enjoy these games compared to almost 3 in 4 girls. So do you think 60% so means 3 in 4 girls? No, it's actually 2 in 3 girls. All right, so this means this is an error in fact, okay, not necessarily grammar. What else? Another error here is that just under 3/4 of boys say they like cycling. Look at the data under cycling, okay, compared to approximately a fifth of all girls. So do you think 60% is a fifth? So this one is wrong because it's actually a sixth, okay? So to rephrase 60%. And then the only activity which has become, okay, again is not consistent with the use of the simple present tense. So you say the only activity which has become more popular, okay, with girls than with boys is art and craft, which is more popular, okay? So not has become. So you have to be consistent because if you're using the simple present tense, it has to be consistent all throughout. And then look at this, just over 50% of girls enjoy this pastime compared to only about a quarter of boys. So is quarter of boys really appropriate? Okay, so for arts and craft, no, because it's 40%. Okay, so maybe you can say nearly half. Okay, but not really a quarter. Okay, and then how about in the last? In the last paragraph, so again, it's an error in grammar. So you don't say the figures are seeming. So you say the figures seem to suggest. Okay, so figures plural, so you use seem. Okay, now let's just have one good sample answer for task one. Okay, so let's look at a very good answer. Okay, if you remember, I actually gave you the graph on this one. Okay, what happened to Grange Park from 1920 to the present? What changes happened in that particular park? So the some examiners think this is a very good answer. Okay, now what I want you to do is, as I read this, try to come up. Okay, you remember there are four criteria. Remember, task achievement. Um, what else? Grammatical accuracy, and then you have the vocabulary. Okay, and then you have coherence and cohesion. Now, as I read this, try to determine which is the strongest. Okay, of all these criteria, which do you think would this particular examinee get the highest score when it comes to the four? Grange Park was opened in 1920, a rectangular area with access from Arnold Avenue on the north side and from Eldon Street on the south side. There was a fountain in the center with a stage for musicians situated center left, a glass house to the right of the Eldon Street entrance, and a pond for water plants in the northeast corner opposite. Around the edges of the park, there were rose gardens with seats nearby for people to smell the flowers and listen to music. The park has altered considerably since then. Now, there's one largish rose garden occupying the central area where the fountain stood and with seats all around it. One of the smaller rose gardens remains on the north side of the park. The bandstand, stage for musicians, has also been replaced by an amphitheater for concerts and associated seating. The glass house is gone and its place is a water feature. Similarly, where the pond for water plants stood, there's now a children's play area with a cafe nearby. Access to the park is still via two original entrances, but there is now a third entrance near the water feature from an underground car park. Despite the apparently significant changes, the park retains the basic elements of flowers, water, seating, and music, with the addition of a cafe and a children's play area. Okay, now can you type in the chat box of the four criteria, okay, which do you think would be given the highest score based on this? Is it coherence and cohesion? Is it vocabulary? Is it task achievement? Okay, or is it grammar? Okay, coherence and cohesion according to Gladys. For Danica is task achievement. Okay, for Maricor is coherence, cohesion, make coherence. All right. Now, what particular band score? Okay, so if you are going to give this, for example, a band score for, let's say, you be the examiner, okay? In terms of task achievement, do you think was this particular answer able to achieve the task of comparing? So what happened to the park from 1920 up to the present, okay? So in terms of task achievement, what band score would you give? Would it be a 6, 7, 8, 9? Okay, so for Gladys, it's an 8 in terms of task achievement. Okay. Or for me, it's a 6. Okay, so do you think when you say a 6, okay, so this means there must be some something's missing perhaps, okay? So remember, what the thing is, when you practice, okay, so you could also practice being an examiner yourself, okay? So maybe you could look at your particular composition and then look at the uh, um, download the rubric, okay? So that's used by the examiners, and see for yourself, okay? So how much, I mean, how would you fare in each of the tasks? Okay, so 7, a 6, or a 7. Okay. For example, for me, I think what I find here is the range of vocabulary, I think, okay? So because he uses for example, very precise vocabulary, especially when it comes to the spatial vocabulary. Okay, so for example, he would use, for example, nearby, okay, or opposite, okay. So and then he used the exact words, okay. So using, for example, amphitheater, okay. So of course, referring to what uh, the vocabulary used, okay. So already in the figure. Okay, but this is what they would consider as very good answer, and for me a very good answer would be no less than 7. Okay, so it would be 7 and higher band scores. Okay, so final tips for you guys. Read the question carefully. Okay, so because remember, task achievement, okay, that's an important criteria. Analyze the task, underline important information as you are going through there. If it's a computer-based task, okay, so then take note. Okay, so what are the significant features? Okay, so because you'll be provided with a paper and pen, even if it's a computer-based. Okay, so you might like to highlight. Okay, so which one should I include as part of my composition? Okay, spend time understanding the information and the graphic. Do not immediately start writing. Please take time to plan rather than you write your answer twice. Okay, so it's better to take your time to plan. Once you have planned, then please follow your outline. Okay, provide an overview. Remember, the overview or the trend does not include any data yet. Okay, describe the information. Okay, by this time providing percentages, figures. Okay, numbers, and compare and contrast information. Okay. The introduction sentence, okay, so make sure that you introduce it by rephrasing the prompt. Understand the functioning of the paragraph. So tip for you is you might like to combine the rephrasing of the prompt and the overall trend, okay? And then when you go now to the details, use another paragraph, okay? So state the trend, then support your statement with an item of detail from the table or chart. Again, let me remind you, don't make any assumptions. Don't interpret the data, okay? Do not attribute the cause or effects, okay? So just focus on what you see, okay? And then a task with more than one visual image, what you should do is to write about them together or separately. So depending on what you intend to do, okay? All right, so there you go. I'm now going to turn you over to Miss Danica, who will give us more information, okay? So about other information about the IELTS website. Over to you, Miss Danica.
Okay. Hi everyone. Thanks for still sticking with us during this time. I know it's a bit late for us here in the Philippines, but Miss Marge was able to really share a lot of good tips, a lot of strategies in answering the task 1 of the writing test. I'd like to share my screen, Miss Marge. Can I share my screen? Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm here to just discuss very briefly, the offers that we have here at the British Council. So let me just put it on presentation mode. Anyway, so some of the offers that we have here in the British Council, we have the Road to Ielts, which is an online preparation course where you will be able to access a lot of practice tests, a lot of ebooks that are available for you. And also we also have the practice zones, also advice and tutorials, video advice, and video tutorials from IELTS experts themselves. What's really good about registering your test here at the British Council is that you're able to access the last minute version of the Road to IELTS. So with the last minute version, you actually get 3 sets of practice tests. And this is not only a practice test for the IELTS on paper, you will also be able to access IELTS on computer practice tests. So this is a new feature in Road to IELTS. So if you're taking the computer delivered or the IELTS on computer test, please take advantage of this because it actually simulates the exact screen that you will see when you're taking your IELTS on computer. Okay. Another offer that we have is the IELTS Success Essentials, and you can absolutely, take advantage of all the British Council developed preparation resources. So if you go to this site over here, you can take a photo, you can screenshot and visit the site later, and you'll get a compilation of all our available preparation resources, and they have different links. So you can access each of these separately as well. And of course, we have a special offer for all of our IFNG members. We have the free IELTS Speak Up plus an IELTS prep book. So before, if you have actually taken advantage of some of your members have already, entered some of the promo codes that we shared to your group. This time, we're actually leveling it up. We also added a free session of the IELTS Speak Up, and the IELTS Speak Up is again another new offer from the British Council where you get to have a one-on-one practice session or speaking practice session with an IELTS expert. And these IELTS experts are actually based in different countries. So sometimes you'll get an IELTS expert here in the Philippines, sometimes abroad, sometimes in the UK, etc. So it's really good to have this one-on-one special sessions with these IELTS experts, and they would be able to give you customized recommendation and even tips. So for you to be able to avail of this one, you have to take the test here in the Philippines, and you should take the IELTS on paper or IELTS on computer. So this is not available for IELTS for UKVI tests. This is applicable for test sessions until December 31 of this year. And you have to enter the promo code, which is flashed on your screen right now. It's BCIFNG October. So before, when we had a promo before, some people weren't able to enter the promo code. And this is not read by the system. So we advise you to take note of the promo code field when you're registering for the test, so you'd be able to enter the promo code here, and the system can read that you have actually availed of this promo. So if you don't know how to input the promo code, again, you can take a screenshot of this link. It's www.ieltsasia.org/ph/events/promo code input instructions. But I know that your admin here would be also sharing all these information in the different chat groups that you have here. So yeah, you can also ask information from them as well. So I think that's it from me. If you have any questions for Miss Marge, you may put it on the chat box while we're still here. Okay, I don't see any questions yet on the chat box. Miss Marge, would you like to say anything before we end the session?
Yes. First of all, thank you for this invitation, British Council, as well as the IFNG group. It's been my pleasure to actually share whatever it is that I know that could help you actually ace the IELTS. So I wish you all the best in your endeavors po.
Thanks again, IFNG team. Sir Jeff?
Okay, thanks everyone. It's it's an honor for us, ma'am, to be to give some of your to give some of the informations that you shared. And for British Council, wow, that's an incredible offer. That's really amazing. So
Yes.
you just level it up.
Yes, actually,
So
this is exclusive. So this is not available for others outside your group. So it's only your group who can avail.
yeah. So it's gonna be Gladys who will share this information to our main group. We will not just post this on our page, but we will share some little bit information so you're just gonna have an idea. Okay, thank you so much, Miss Marge and Miss Danica, and to my co-admins Marvin and also Gladys, who's sleeping right now. Okay, to all the members, good night and stay safe. Bye.
Bye-bye po. Thank you.